after Jesus' trial, they sent him to be crucified. What that means is they placed a heavy wooden beam on his shoulders. It was practically a log. And there were many women there who loved Jesus, who followed him, Mary and Mary Magdalene and Salome, and even Jesus' mother was there, and they were weeping to see this. Jesus carried that beam down the streets, out of the city of Jerusalem. And after a while, the weight of that log, the splinters that were digging into his shoulders, the beating that he had taken earlier, they were starting to catch up with him, and Jesus fell. He fell a couple times, stumbling along. And so the authorities, they compelled a man who just was standing by, a man named Simon from the city of Cyrene, to carry Jesus' cross the rest of the way. What a burden to carry. And they went out the gates of the city right along the main road. And along there were several poles that had been erected just for this purpose of crucifixion, so that anyone who was coming into the city would be warned not to upset the human order. Now, I'd like to spare you the details of what they did to Jesus, but I think sometimes it's good to name them, to remember what God did for us, what God endures for us. Not just then, but every day would we break his heart. And so I'm going to tell you, they hurt Jesus. They hurt the one who loved them. They hoisted Jesus up as if he was some piece of machinery. And then they pounded nails through his hands and his feet, nailed him to that cross. And after they were done, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." And Jesus, he hung there hours, weakening in the heat of the sun and the strain of holding himself up and trying to take the weight off of the nails, to be able to get air into his lungs. And as he endured this, people derided him. They said, "Well, if you are God, well, then why don't you just come down and save yourself?" And this was tempting for Jesus. Jesus hadn't been tempted like this since he was out in the desert for 40 days fasting. It was tempting. But Jesus was doing something bigger. This was a sign of love, of all the sacrifices that God makes for us. It was also a sign of the kind of things that we do to God when we break God's heart. Every time we reject God, every time we hurt other people, it's like a nail into that cross. There are criminals also being crucified on either side of Jesus. They were murderers. They were insurrectionists, the things they accused Jesus of. And one of those criminals even derided Jesus, made fun of him, as if somehow that would make his situation better. There was another criminal who said, who argued back against him and said, Jesus doesn't deserve this. We deserve our punishment. He regretted the things that he had done. And Jesus looked at him with those loving eyes, even as he hung on a cross, and said to that criminal, "Today, you'll be with me in paradise." The day wore on. At one point, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Those words don't make sense to us because even God knew despair, knew pain and suffering, knew the worst that we could ever feel. Why would God do something like that? Because of love. But man, that's deep love. In the afternoon, they gave Jesus some wine on the end of a sponge. And after he took that wine, Jesus said, "It is finished." And he stopped struggling. He gave up his spirit. Now, this was the middle of the day, but even the sun bowed its head in that moment. Even the curtain in the temple that separates the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, this place, this curtain that separated God and the people, was torn in two. There was no barrier anymore. And that was it. Like a Passover lamb without blemish, hung out to dry, Jesus died on that cross. Later on that evening, a man named Joseph of Arimathea and the Pharisee Nicodemus, who were secret followers of Jesus, they asked Pilate for Jesus' body, and they took it and they placed it in a borrowed tomb. It was practically a hole in the ground, a cave. They rolled a stone over it. They and everybody else assumed that this was the end of the story. That this was the end of every story. This was the end of God's love incarnate. But I'll tell you, God was not done.